So, hey, everybody. I'm going to start out with a presentation that I confess I was invited to present this when it was shared with the Moving Towards Liberation cohort. And so this is like a remix on that. And depending on how we go, we might just stop it and have conversation and just see what works. But I'm going to start out with this because there are 3 videos that I wanted to center us, and then we'll just see how it goes. All right, so I'm hitting the share. I'm choosing the file. Don't share the tab audio because that'll shut me up. All right. Bam. So hopefully everybody can see this. So we're going to talk about liberatory youth development, spit and bubblegum. So when I was young, one of my girlfriends always used that term, spit and bubblegum, like we're putting this together with spit and bubblegum. And I think that when it comes to liberation, we have been encased in a harmful, violent, oppressive system for so long. Like really figuring out what liberation is isn't something you just apply a few principles and say, all right, it's liberation time, because the system's still all around us. So we're just pulling it together with our wisdom, knowledge from the past, from the future, our creativity to make it happen. So that's how we're going to go. I'm Geri, Mama Geri, Dr. Geri Peak. I evaluator, I coach. I call myself a spiritual demographer, but once upon a time, pretty recently, I ran a high school. And that high school lasted for about 4 years. It was put together by people in the community, and we took a transformative approach to education. So even though I've been in youth development a long time, this was an amazing time to think about the power of transformation. And lately, I've been thinking about transformation as a means for achieving liberation. But first, we got to think about where we're at. So I want to play these couple of videos, and I may have to, I want people to tell me you can hear it because I turned off the tab audio so you could hear me. That's a Zoom problem. See, Hopin may not have that problem. So if you can't hear the video, let me know, okay? Somebody's saying words, yes, you understood. So I know you're listening.
You have to unmute your screen share.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm just going to get it going and you guys tell me if it's working. I work from Chrome, so things don't always work the way they're supposed to. All right, can you hear the audio? Can you hear the audio, Justin?
Try playing it. It's coming through your audio. Your screen share currently, audio is currently off, it looks like.
Yeah, I turned it off because I was afraid it wouldn't let me talk. So I'm just going to do it again. Leave it on. It's okay. All right.
Finding a purpose in the work we do or the way that we spend our time, which resonates deeply with who we think we are, is an essential part of knowing who we are. That in a way, if you don't know what you can do, you don't really know what you might be. Human talent, human ability, like the world's natural resources, is often buried deep. It's not just lying around on the surface. You have to go looking for it. And that's why I think so many people don't know what their talents are, because they've never actually come upon them yet. One of the things that stops us doing what we might want to do is our own self-censorship, a fear that we'll fall flat on our face, that, well, me, I'm not even entitled to it. A second, I think, is other people's attitudes, friends and family, often well-intentioned. There are all forms of tacit disapproval that prevent us moving forward. It can be the raised eyebrow of a friend, or a group culture. What, you seriously? What, you would do that? Oh, okay. Or cultural constraints about the roles of women or the communities. So I'm not trying to say that this is easy, but I'm saying it's essential. and that there are things we can do, particularly in the systematic process that we put forward through education and organization of communities, that can assist it. You know, the old model is predicated on a particular view of intelligence and talent, and I think for the future we need to evolve systems of education and of organizational planning and of community development which are based on a model of diversity rather than of conformity. We still run our education systems as if life is linear. We run them as if it's mechanistic. This is one of the reasons so many things get phased out of education, because people say, well, you'll never get a job if you do that. Education is not a mechanistic process, and organizations are not mechanisms. You know, if you look at the management chart of most organizations, it looks like a wiring diagram. And it all kind of suggests that these are like mechanisms, and they're not. Human life and human communities are much more like organisms, in the sense that we flourish under certain conditions and we fade under certain conditions. And our success is always synergistic with our environment. It is about human flourishing. But it's also about recognizing that education and our communities are part of cultures and they're not independent and insulated from them. But at the heart of it, the elemental bit of it, is a different conception of human possibility, that finding your passion does change everything.
In this video, and I just want you guys to be noticing different things about not just the video and what it's saying, who's saying it, and what they're saying. Oops. Now, why did that happen? There.
What is it about this culture that makes so many of us unhappy, sick, alienated from ourselves, unkind to others, unkind to ourselves, frustrated? And of course, what it is that contrary to this idea of human nature, we discussed the issue of human nature. Is there human nature? So there's one idea of human nature, which is what this culture promotes, is that human beings are by nature selfish and competitive and aggressive and just out for personal gain and domination. Now there's another view of human nature, which is that there is no human nature, that we just sort of a tabula rasa, or which means an empty slate on which you can write anything you want. So this used to be one idea, and particularly in the 40s, 50s, there was this idea of your kids, you can just train them into anything. You know, you can program into anything by behavioral programming. So that basically we're empty, we're devoid of any internal nature, so it's whatever we happen to learn. But there's a third view of human nature, which is what actually, so on the one hand you have this view of competition, aggression, and on the other hand, this empty slate. There's a third view of human nature that we're actually wired in certain ways. We're wired for contact, for love, for connection, for generosity, for connection with the larger whole, beyond the small ego. You know, we're wired for universality and all that. And then whatever conditions interfere with that is what creates the dysfunction. So then from that point of view, if you have a society that promotes selfishness, that promotes competition, that promotes aggression, that promotes people feeling dissatisfied with what they have, that always says more and more and more, that always says that people are only worth what they produce or what they own, or it's only matter that matters. It's materialistic. So that our form, whether you're pretty or handsome or toned or flabby, that's what defines who you are. Well, if there's a human nature that's quite contrary to that, then creating a society that goes against human nature is what creates the suffering. So I would say that what creates the suffering is that we live in a completely unnatural society that actually tramples on what it means to be a human being, and that's the essence of suffering. And there's so many ways in which our society does that.
why have the virtues and focus on individual transformation? Or one reason, and this is something I really want to have some experts come and talk here at BYI with the students about. One thing was that neurologists have been finding that when we soothe our fear response, we actually allow our frontal cortex to function more effectively. So in a workshop with a guy, John Woodall, he's at Princeton, said that instead of 10%, we use 1 to 2% of our brain. But when we have these soothing responses that allow us to step away from our fight or flight and use oxytocin, which is now known as the tend or befriend neurochemical, as opposed to those that promote the fear, this fear response, we actually allow more of the frontal cortex to be used, which allows people to actually think more logically. And even political research recently, in the last presidential campaign, people found that if you have a strong opinion, no amount of information or data will shift that opinion. And young people are in an environment where they can actually identify their strength qualities. And this is the field of positive psychology. This is really the foundation of this work, that when you identify a strength quality and you work to perfect that, you actually elevate the rest of your strength qualities. And it has this effect on the brain of allowing you to be calm, release oxytocin, the tender befriend chemical, so that you're really able to use more of your brain. So, I wonder when I have a student in class who is oppositional and, pushing back on everything, and then come to find out they're dealing with some stress in their life, and their grades are suffering, and they can't seem to figure out why, and no one can figure out why. They have the same information, they have the tools, people are helping them with their studies. I think some of that just might reflect from the fact that they're in such an oppositional state, that they're really fighting against themselves. And that's due to us. I mean, we're creating this environment for students, not them being bad and them doing something to us. That's us not elevating and creating a safe experience for young people. So this is Geri Peak at Baltimore Youth Initiative High School. Yeah. So I want to just pause and see what you noticed. You can use the chat or you can open your microphones.
I can get things started here for a second. I think one thing I personally noticed was that it seems as though we are the enemies of our own demise in a lot of ways. We have outside stressors that get brought in that affect us and that will tank us. And a lot of that's due to our responses to that. And what can happen, what should happen, is that educators, mentors, people just around us can support us or support young people. When I say us, I'm really referring more so to young people. I'm just generalizing. Can support young people and really help them thrive by recognizing the downfalls in those systems and correcting it and being there and being responsive. Anyone else want to chime in?
You're also welcome to use the chat, but let me throw out a different thing in here. So one of the things I noticed, and the reason I use, and some of you who know me might be, what you got with Sir Ken Robinson and Gabor Mate? What I noticed in looking at these videos this year as opposed to whenever I put together that presentation, like 2013, is that it just really stood out to me that white people already know this system is toxic and damaging to people. And even if you look at who was in the video, and one had drawn cats, but where the focus was, it took a long time for the focus to be on people who were noticeably Black or brown. So one of the things I noticed is that the despair constructed into this society and a realization that the system is causing it has nothing to do with us, not at least essentially, even though Black and brown people are often blamed for the ills of society. And that was something that really struck me. So we know what's going on. We know the system is toxic, and folks understand that is coming from the system, from those systemic forces. So let me back off and see what else others have to say about that, and anything else you noticed. You can also use the chat if you like to. All right, so I don't see any questions, so I'm going to keep going.
There looks like there's a response. Taking the arts out of urban schools, especially beginning with Reagan-era policies, is a cultural disenfranchisement that works against young people finding their passion. I think that's a really good point. I think we have there also, since even before the Reagan-era policies, you can see from the Industrial Revolution that we had a very rigid way of learning, and it's very industrial because you're preparing people for assembly lines, and then when you put the arts in schools, it kind of like opened things up a little bit. But when you start to restrict that more, then you're saying that no, only focus on what's going to make money instead of what's going to make you whole. And I think learning about arts and your own culture is a very big thing. Like learning about African art or learning about native arts, things of that nature can really broaden everything. Mama Geri, you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I mean, I just think that you're right on point, that the mechanisms in the society are all designed either implicitly or explicitly to help a small portion thrive, make money, gain resources, gain advantage. And we're all, the way we have set up schools to start with education so early, with academic education so early, there are lots of researchers and educators who feel that that's not the way to do things, but we just buy into it. Like ask any parent, they don't want their kid to play up through 7. They want, round 4, you got to start learning letters and numbers, if not before that. We've really bought into the idea, even though we know that children who learn to read very early make some sort of usually smooth, but not always smooth transition to reading, using the brain differently when they hit 6 or 7. So you can do that, that's fine, but kids are going to engage a certain different part of their brain as they get into that older age to learn. So you could also use the term being socialized, expanding your knowledge instead of narrowing your knowledge, narrowing your possibilities. So let's keep going. No, unless anybody else, and Justin, just feel free to holler if somebody says anything in the chat, because you know how it is when you're trying to do the presentation and talk. So just
no problem. I'll keep you updated.
Yeah. And folks, I mean, really, you feel free to just open up your microphone at any point and say anything you'd like to. Oh, and Jill came into the room. Yes. Yeah, I mean, there's not that many of us all come into the main.
Hello, Dr. Peak. How are you?
Hi, I'm Geri.
Okay, all right, Geri. I'm Jill.
Hey.
Yeah, well, I've been working as an arts educator and in arts education advocacy for a very long time, but also in the context of education generally, and mostly in relations to public schools and specifically in Baltimore for 19 years in city schools. And I'm still working with the Baltimore Arts Education Initiative. We just had a town hall update on the status of arts education in city schools. And, it could be a very large discussion because, yes, there is the whole part about, arts that may be identified with one's roots, but it depends on who's identifying what those roots are. And, I would argue that not having arts education denies the access to the full breadth of arts, whether it comes from the typically Western-based classical tradition in music or visual art or whatever, as well as the arts of African Americans, African diaspora, other cultures.
Mm-hmm.
There's a great little video online that says Black people don't like classical music, and in it, a couple of African American musicians share their frustrations with having that identified. It starts with a gentleman who was a cellist, and he got stopped by the police one night, pulled over, and he had his cello in the car. And the policeman accused him of having stolen it.
Right.
And so, actually, to convince the policeman that, it wasn't stolen, he had to take it out of his case, sit by the side of the road, and play the darn thing.
Yep.
So.
Yeah.
It's kind of there's a greater denial when you don't even have it at all in school. It limits what students can, for me, all music is for everyone, whoever wants to take up, whatever part of it speaks to them. But how can it even speak to you if you don't ever get to engage with it?
Yeah,
So.
I think these next slides I'm going to go forward because you bring up this idea of, what is the capacity of Black people in particular. So, so the next thing I wanted to do is just bring these slides forward. The wealthiest individual in all of human history remains Mansa Musa. Sorry, Elon. I think it's still true. Not sure, but I still think it's true. A 14th century king of Mali. You don't have to read the whole slide. This lady I found out about just really ironically through a devotional gathering in my faith community. She was a lecturer at Howard University. Prior to her marriage to her husband, who was a dean at Howard, she actually owned property. A woman, a former slave, a Black woman, owned property in 1884. That was like, as a single woman, on any counts, that is odd for a woman. She pointed out in this letter that 50 years out of slavery, Black people had accumulated $7 billion worth of property. That's $7 billion. Letter was written in 1914. And she also noted that coming out of slavery with 95% of the Black population unable to read or write, that number had been reduced to 30% in that same 50 years. Now, I won't do it I don't do it anymore because they just won't do it. But, think about what society tells us about the capacity of Black women. Jill just told us, we can't make classical music. That's one of the messages that's out there in society. That's not just an individual person's racial stereotype. It's a collective stereotype that then infused in this person in a traffic stop to question this guy about his cello, right? And so then when you think about the context of the horrific violence against Black people, against Indigenous people that we have witnessed and not even character. In fact, we didn't even witness this until recently. Most people didn't even know this had happened. I certainly hadn't heard about it until maybe 10 years ago. And for many people, it's been this past couple of years between a couple of TV shows and the uptick in awareness of the racial pandemic of racial injustice, that we see this kind of violence. But we forget, even when we see it, that this was a systematic attack on people and property all across the country to take property away, to minimize resource generation, and give that over to white folks who could have earned it, but they didn't earn that. This is property people have bought and worked for. One of my daughters was telling me about in Haiti, the free Blacks would buy property because they would bid up the price of property because they were used to not having a lot of things, so they didn't waste their money and they could pay more for property, and they would just bid it up out of the access of whites. And there's this letter where this guy's complaining about how they're so unfair bidding up the price of property. And this slide, it just talks about something a friend of mine said, who happens to be a world-renowned poet, that, we could have saved a lot of money by just giving every American $1 million. It'd be much less than any of these strategies. So,
Mama Geri, are you sharing your screen right now?
I thought I was, but if I'm not, I got to go back.
Yeah. I just.
Oh man, I thought I was sharing the screen. Weird. We'll just do a quick backup and it's okay. So yeah, I just was showing. Mansa Musa. He was rich, still richest guy. There's Corley Franklin Cook, lecturer at Howard that I talked about. This is the Tulsa massacre. So that there were communities all over the country that were decimated in order to get access to the land and kill Black people. And that doesn't cover what was done to Indigenous people. And there's Papo, his was Papalero Melendez. So then we were going to just take some time. We won't break out because it's just us here, to just talk about the strengths and powers of melanated folks when we think about the kind of disconnected society that we're in. So, Jill, you've stepped into the room, but there's a few other people here, so I'm just going to defer to the chat. I always have fun trying to find it again. There it is.
And we can give you guys some moments to type up your responses.
Or to open your microphone, which will, you can join us in the circle. It's just us, little family chat.
Just us. No judging anything you have to say. Feel open.
I think that, it's almost offensive at this point to bring it up, but extreme resilience, because we're still here. And we, despite the inequities that we can calculate in terms of our health, mental health, economic and social status and well-being, we find ways to thrive. We create art and works of art. We bring beauty into the world. We participate in loving one another. We practice forgiveness. Despite being in this condition, we can direct our own advancement. We have the tools and capacity. We have the proof. We have data on that.
What I was just thinking of was I think there is this perception that historical prejudice doesn't necessarily translate into present inequities, and that's something that I just never really understood. And it's like you can see the effects of redlining. You can see the effects of racial segregation. You can see all these things, and but one thing that you also do see is the community just slowly coming back together after, I think, after schools were integrated and segregation was after Brown v. the Board of Education and things of that nature, where the communities were taken out of the decision-making process, and you had this like white saviorism happening. You're starting to see now, especially I think after Freddie Gray and Trayvon Young, and during these things, that the communities are really banding back together and becoming more and more resilient, and really pushing for like, this is what we need, and this is and this is how we're going to get ahead, and understanding that sometimes, pushing to change the system, but also creating your own for the community is, I think, something really powerful. And Jill has just put something in the chat, and I can read that off right now if you want me to, unless you want to respond.
Go ahead, Jill, if you want to share what you put in the chat and talk about that some more.
Yeah, so I just wrote, when the voice and view of any group is silenced or suppressed.
I can read it off for her.
Yeah, and
She says, when the
echo,
voice and view of any group is silenced or suppressed, everyone loses. Maybe differently for different people, but everyone loses. The society, the culture loses. And couldn't agree with you more. The last president of apartheid South Africa just recently died. He actually worked very closely with Nelson Mandela in ending apartheid, but he still took part in apartheid and advancing some of the policies before his death. But not before his death, before he started working with Nelson Mandela, and he started a charity foundation trying to correct the wrongs done by apartheid. And in his last message before he died, he had expressed that some of the same points that you had put right there, that the suppression and the segregation of a group of people, of the African people, makes everyone lose. And it was evident. Jill also just said you need self-knowledge and self-esteem, and the same for family, school, and community.
Yeah, I'm going to share the screen again as we continue to sort of talk over the next set of slides that I have, because I think it'll continue to move this idea forward. But what I'm hearing is the consistency of needing to be the kind of people who can usher in a change. And when we think about liberation, we don't work for liberation to sustain a system that we want to liberate ourselves from. Right? Reform is not liberation. if the system is functioning properly to be equitable to everyone, then we don't need to be liberated from it. We need to be liberated from it because it's harmful. So this is from Dave Vaughn's When Baltimore Wakes, from LBS. The attempt to annihilate Black people from the pages of human history has buried the tools of social transformation beneath the pathologies that are projected onto us. So let's just take a pause. That's what we're talking about. We're ignorant, we can't train or be learned. These biases, some of them come from ignorance, but most of them were constructed. Like, the whole idea of the watermelon eating pickaninny was constructed because Black farmers were having a lot of success economically with selling watermelons. And to undermine those sales came the idea of the low class, ignorant, Black caricature, spitting out the watermelon seeds. It was because we were doing well economically that image was constructed. So it was like any other marketing program. It was a marketing program, marketing our ignorance. Anyway, he goes on to say, it is time to bring those tools to light in order to build a society that can affirm Black life while destroying the 500-year white supremacist assault on humanity, on the humanity of Black people, as it has manifested itself in the human social service sector in Baltimore. So this is paired with 500 years of abuse and harm and murder and the taking of land from the indigenous peoples. So when we think about liberation, it requires our transformation. And that transformation, I argue, is a spiritual change. It's a spiritual change because it has to do with qualities, developing the qualities of ourselves to make us unable to harm others. And for that, we also have to see ourselves. And so that gets all us into this arena of cognitive dissonance when we have a society that is led by people who have promoted their own superiority over others in order to dominate and control and get the most of the resources. And then does not question, a whole population of white people, in order to participate in this, have to pretend to not know what's going on. Cognitive dissonance, which brings us to the question, can you lie to yourself? We can debate it all as much as we want to, and I go back and forth with that. But in the end, it's like you can set up a condition where you can't see yourself clearly, and that's how you permit yourself to lie to yourself. So I first read When Baltimore Awakes not long after it came out in late 2019. And then in December of 2019, so there's Dave Vaughn, y'all know him. And this over here is Shauna Murray Brown, y'all know her. And I went to a presentation that she made as part of an independent study for her doctoral program, where she presented anti-colonial ideas around research. And it changed the way that I practice evaluation, but it also changes the way I think about everything, not because I didn't know it, but because young innovators bring new ideas to the table, new insight into what many of us have been working toward, and have spoken it into a time and a presence where it's necessary. So waiting for it to load. That's interesting. All right. So what I learned from Dave Vaughn is in his executive summary, he states three things, and I call them three dynamic premises. The first one is that Black people are inherently pathological, but we've just seen some evidence for that. Two types of evidence. The first is we've seen some white men talking about how the society is the pathological thing, the toxic thing that is ruining our society and messing with our inherent alignment for good, for humans, right? So it can't be just us doing it if everybody already knows it's not us. And the other evidence we have is the evidence for Black people's excellence. That's more than just a T-shirt that says, Black excellence. Actually seeing that, certainly beyond Mansa Musa, we have economic prowess, we have artistic prowess, we are intellectually inclined, we are folk wisdom inclined, and what disrupts that is the same toxic nature of our society, which allows any human to decline, right? The second thing is that because we do have people who have expertise in looking at problems, thinking about them, and finding solutions, we don't look to the Black intellectuals. And I'm going to go beyond intellectuals, because in this day, all people can collectively generate knowledge, the common folks as well as the educated folks or what have you. So these boundaries, those are artificial. So I would push back and say it's not just Black intellectual formations, it's collective formations around advancing society. So when we look outside of Black community to find cures, they're usually cures that are based on our pathology. Not always, but you got to ask that question. And the third one is that these institutions that are serving us are not run or led by us. And I would once again push back and say, actually, like you look here in Baltimore, and a lot of social service systems are run by Black people in charge. They're the directors, the leaders, they're running the little divisions and departments. But those Black people have completely committed themselves to upholding white dominance. Right? So it is by their perpetuation of these systems of oppression that, white folks can be like, I wasn't doing that. Look, the Black people were doing that. It must be good. That must be what you want, because see, there's Black people that are doing it. So with those premises, there come curatives. And so now I talk about how those curatives relate to youth development. So, we all know about nothing about us without us, nothing about youth without youth, because now I'm 64 and I'm not us anymore. So we need to stop pathologizing Black people and young people, even though we might be in circumstances that the ills of society are writ large on the faces, the bodies, the presence of the young people we're working with and dealing with. And they might be presenting with all kinds of behaviors that are challenging, that have to be addressed. But it's not because there's anything inherently wrong with us. That's been socialized upon them. See, that has been put upon us. We apply our own innovations and methodologies to our solutions. And that doesn't mean that we can't look at other innovations from other places. But if we're coming up with innovations for problems that we suffer from, we should be looking at our solutions at least as often, if not more, than solutions from external to the community. And then we need to make and take space for our leadership, and that a leadership that is looking towards the best in ourselves and uplifting our best outcomes, and not one that is reinforcing a negative characterization of who we are. I'm going to I think I'm going to skip this video. It's on the school to prison pipeline. And Justin, I'm trying to see, what's our stop time? Is it 3?
I believe it's 3. Let me go to the.
Yeah, show. I got 20 minutes. I could see it use it, but
3 o'clock. Yeah,
it's 3 o'clock. I'm going to
20 minutes.
I don't know. Jill, you want to see the video? I can't play it, but I think keep going.
No, that's okay. I can look it up. I think I may have seen it.
Yeah, it's certainly not new.
And I've seen a lot about the. I've experienced a lot of the school to prison pipeline, just being in the schools. I'm not saying I know everything about it. It's just, yeah, I know.
Yeah, it's not a new video, and I do hope the slides will be shared with people afterwards. I didn't get them out before, but or you can just ask me and I can give you the link. Or, honestly, I can drop the link in the chat next time I drop the slides. but the point of that video is that the school to prison pipeline is really about acculturating young people to being arrested and incarcerated in school, so that we make sure that we have a prison population to make the stuff that prisoners make for cheap, so that it fuels our manufacturing in this country. And something that Ava DuVernay didn't mention it in 13th. It's not mentioned anywhere else, but it really stands out to me that in Pennsylvania, when they ran out of prisoners, they didn't have enough prisoners to run their private for-profit prisons. Some police and law enforcement folks, judges, lawyers, and police colluded to do this thing where they arrested white kids for minor offenses because they just needed more people in prison. And they would tell the parents, hey, we're going to put them in jail because it's going to scare them straight. They'll get scared. You know, they will never do bad again. And of course, parents are like, yeah, absolutely, scare them straight. And then these kids would end up in jail 5-10 years on sentences because they had no Black people in their town, I guess. I don't know. So anyway, again, from When Baltimore Awakes, this arrangement renders Black people merely as objects of other people's thought experiments and not as human beings who are capable of being the drivers of the institutions that govern their lives, or the communities that govern their lives, or the households. Like, we're not really trusted in this society to run our own households, our own communities. And, you know, whenever there's a failure of Black leadership, it reinforces the idea that we are to be infantilized, you know, that we need to have everything taken care of for us, right? But young people themselves, there's Shauna. I like to put embarrassing, goofy pictures of friends of mine. And so Mindalyn, I don't know if you've left yet, but there's Mindalyn. And that's Joy DeGrew. And this is a friend of ours, Dara Feldman, who's a virtues facilitator. And I don't know, I look like a giant next to all these petite, beautiful women. And there's our friend Shauna. And it's just a hilarious picture. Oh, click the right screen. And these are her 6 anti-colonial liberatory questions that for research that I apply to evaluation, but I think we can apply them to other things. First of all, are the questions we ask questions that generate from the community that is being explored? So we're asking questions that are meaningful to them. And do we seek to dismantle the present colonial system and vision something new? Can it contribute to the act of decolonizing, giving land back? Does it center the axiology and wisdom of the interest group, enforcing just relationships and looking not just in the past, but definitely reading reality collectively? Does it acknowledge historical and systemic context of oppressions? And is the theory accessible to the people it seeks to explain? And again, I'll go to this idea in this day. All people have access to knowledge. I actually have a great quote about that I got to put in this presentation. And so the idea that only certain people with certain degrees are allowed to generate knowledge is an affront to humanity. If you believe in spiritual, stuff, to deities. It just, we are creative, we are intelligent, we can do all the things we need to do for one another. And when we're kept ignorant, as Jill was saying earlier about the arts, it harms all of us when part of the population is not allowed to contribute creatively to the advancement of society. So the third curative, this, around leadership, this one is where we really want to make or taste it. Oh, so the last one was like around people coming up with our own innovations. We can all participate in that. That's the second curative. The third curative is getting youth engaged in leadership. And most of you know Youth as Resources, a local Baltimore organization. And I've worked with many youth programs, some of which had true, honest youth leadership, some of whom had token youth leadership. The idea is to actually listen to young people who by the time they hit 12, most people's creativity and thinking has already been eroded by the educational system. So it makes sense that we have some kind of process to reawaken the curiosity, the capacity, the confidence and courage for young people to speak their mind. And to do that, we have to create environments where we don't stifle them with so much authority behavior that they can't speak out. So like people don't like, here we have a good culture around how we refer adults, how young people refer to adults. I'm fine with that. But if we do those kind of things in such a way that young people feel like they can't speak when adults are in the room and things like that, then I say trash all that. Let's do that first name thing, make everybody uncomfortable at least. And let them really know by doing things like, if you're trying to mine wisdom, you sit back and let the young people go first. They may not have much to say about it at first, but if we go first, we'll probably say things they might have said, and then they'll be like, I don't have anything to contribute. If you let people who have the least experience contribute first, they get the confidence of being able to contribute something that nobody else has said yet. And we, who have so much experience, we think, can use our little noodles and think harder and come up with stuff that other people didn't think of off the top of their head. That way, everybody can contribute meaningfully to the conversation, and we train ourselves to remember that we have wisdom. I'm just going to pause. I don't even know what comes yet, but I'm going to pause and stop sharing to see what other people need to say. And I'm checking the chat.
So there's a question posed by Jill. She says, how can we help young people deal with the anger, disillusionment, etc. that comes with historical knowledge? Is knowledge of the legacy of creativity, resilience, and invention enough?
Does anybody else want to address that before I do? Hi, Linda. I mean, Lynn, I'm glad you're still.
You know, if I was going to put my 2 cents in, I think that the goal, I think, is really to make sure they don't become disillusioned. I think there's a lot of things that we can do as a society, but we can also do ourselves to help young people. There's, like you said, there's things like standardized testing that really stifles them, but we can, as mentors and as people who are here trying to support youth development, show them the arts, show them possibilities outside of the normal grind of 9 to 5, just exposing them to more things so they know, like, yeah, so they get more the full picture and not just this not just the negatives, because there's so much negatives, there's so much hurdles to overcome, but if you only focus on those hurdles, then you're not going to finish the race.
So I wonder if anybody else, I see Jill's comment on standardized testing that Justin referenced. I want to see if there's anyone besides Jill and Justin who have something they want to share on this point before I jump in there. So here's my thought. We've been running programs, enrichment programs. We've been defunding them and refunding them and taking them, extracurricular because they're not in schools or when they were in schools and all of this. That's something that has been happening for quite some time. Maybe not as much in certain communities because of resource inequities, but I don't think providing a mechanism for re-education will help when people already know who they are and what they are. I can't do this, I'm not allowed to do that. And it's like, even for myself, I find myself thinking, oh, well, I'm not supposed to do that. I was like, what do you mean you're not supposed to? Like, why are you even thinking that anymore? Like in terms of like where I can travel or what I can sign up to do. Like, it's so deeply ingrained. So I think Justin has a point that we shouldn't educate that in the first place, but we do have to redress these harms. And this maybe takes us into a reparations or abolition conversation, but there are harms to redress. And I think that it's developing the internal capacity of people to see themselves differently. And I do believe the arts has a role in that. I'm an artist, and I feel like when I teach a kid to knit or crochet, if they're sitting in class wearing a hat they made and somebody tries to tell them they're worthless because they can't do something, and they might not use those words, although educators all the time tell young people they're worthless because they can't do something or whatever, it's very common. But you don't have to use those words. It's the tone, the gestures, the look on the face. That's all you need to do to make people feel other, diminished. And but if you do that, if somebody says you can't do anything worthwhile, and it's like, well, your head is cold, but mine's not because I made a hat and it's on my head. Like, like be the capacity, the making, the co-creating. If young people are coming together and learning to address issues in their society, and they know that they got the trash cans put back in the park, that they took out the park. I'm talking about Collington Square Park, actually. They took the trash cans out of the park because they said people were making fires in the trash cans. The park is full of trash. It's like, where should we put trash in trash cans? There's no trash cans, because people didn't deserve to have the trash cans. So some young people wrote and they said, please put the trash cans back in the park. So they know that they got City Hall to put the trash cans back in the park, right? So when young people are doing things to transform themselves in society, they're developing their own spiritual qualities or their characteristics or their virtues or their strength qualities, whatever you want to call it. But if they're more accountable as well as more kind, if they're more respectful as well as caring, if they are more able to show integrity as well as being happy, like those are like different sides of those coins, but those qualities allow young people to be more and more resilient, more and more courageous and contributing to society. And at the same time, there's certain principles that we need to generate in society that are completely liberatory. For example, being a friend to everyone is completely liberatory. Being in a condition where you are have a lot of infighting, you can't advance when you're tugging and pulling against each other. Helping young people see the value of valuing one another gives them a leg up on all the rest of society that's full of infighting. How are we on time? Ooh, 2:54. I'm gonna just see if there's any. Well, it's only family, so I can. I was like, I don't know. I should show this one.
Yeah, I was just about to update you on that one once we hit the 5-minute mark.
Awesome. So this is an illustration by one of my daughters. No more fixing nigga programs. That's with an A, not a hard R. And it just illustrates that our programming is designed to, in communities for Black people in particular, for Indigenous people in particular, the programs that we encounter presume this pathologizing that Davon had noted. And I think she designed this in like probably 2015 after being in a meeting with some folks and organizing, and talking about how there's a presumption there's something wrong with us. So programs were designed to address that deficit. Even if that deficit exists, it's not because there's something wrong with us. That's not where the deficit came from. So we have to really question whether what we are doing is actually addressing and uplifting people by meeting their needs, listening to them, assisting with constructing an environment where everyone can advance. Or are we believing in the lies of of the dominant culture about who we are and how we are, those programs will never work because we wasn't broken like that in the first place. Because no matter how many pathologies an individual might be facing and how many needs they may have in society that need to be addressed, addressing them from the standpoint that there's something wrong with Black people will not work. Giving kids some ameliorating program or experience to take them to the museum or do this and the other. We've been doing that for, I'm 64. We had those kind of programs when I was a kid. It hasn't changed society. We have to educate people so they come out of their education understanding that there's a social problem, there's a systemic problem in society, and most people believe it, and they have to commit themselves. Not, they don't have to all be at the forefront of change, but they have to commit themselves to not contributing to the lie of people not being able to support society. We don't have any education systems right now, I don't believe, going back to that hat of being a high school principal. We have no education systems that consistently bring people through who see society for what it is and are committed to change it. We educate people to be committed to wrestle with the current system. And that keeps, when you're wrestling with the current system, you're actually reinforcing the current system. So this is where the spit and bubble gum comes in. We got to create a practice. We have this liberatory premise that needs to be brought forward so we can develop a liberatory youth development practice. And we have to have some sort of cultural stewardship that supports us in doing that. We have to be willing to transform ourselves in order to do this. We can't do it from the same standpoint. So I have this, this will probably be our final slide looking at the time. Racism is a profound deviation from the standard of true morality. It deprives a portion of humanity of the opportunity to cultivate and express the full range of their capability and to live a meaningful and flourishing life while blighting the progress of the rest of humankind. It cannot be rooted out by contest and conflict. It must be supplanted by the establishment of just relationships among individuals, communities, and institutions of society that will uplift all and not designate anyone as other. We could have a whole workshop on that. The change required is not merely social and economic, but above all moral and spiritual. So I'm just going to see what is here. I'm going to just stop here because we're close to 3. Because that was just some data from something I'd done with young people. Maybe we'll stop with this one. Ultimately, the power to transform the world is affected by love. Love originating from the relationships with the divine, love ablaze among members of a community, love extended without restriction to every human being. So, last tag, any last words, any last thoughts?
I just want to say thank you. I think that was amazing. I think it was very informative. Anyone else want to say something? You got some comments in the chat. You have Minlin said, "Wow, fire! Of course you dropped this truth just as I have to make my exit." Jill said, "Yes, there is much to do." She also said, "That's great. Thanks. Thank you. So great to meet you." And she also, Jill dropped her email if anyone wants to pick up on that. Candace said, "Excellent as always. Hello from us at LBS." All right, it looks like it's 3:00. If you guys want to make your way over to the main stage, you can go ahead, and if you want to copy and paste the chat from the chat. Mom Geri, did you want to drop the your slides in the chat? Your mic's off.
I didn't want to echo if Jill wanted to talk, because I know that was being a problem. But yeah, I'm going to just drop this link in the chat. And if it doesn't work, give me a minute to just make sure that it's anyone with the link can view. So it doesn't work this very minute. Save it.
The link works.
Well, it does. Excellent. So, and then my contact information is also at the end of the presentation. Yeah, and there's some more videos and some other things. It's a 2-part presentation. So there's a bunch more stuff in there. And hey, maybe we'll get together and just enjoy it.
All right. Jill, do you have any last remarks?
Oh dear. I always have something to say. No. No, I really appreciated the whole presentation, the discussion, and the way you framed it. And are you teaching anywhere these days, or where are you mostly doing your work these days?
No, I'm actually trained as a public health researcher. I do evaluation for my job. My kids' high school closed, and I thought we should do some engaged community practice to see what people wanted to do. They said they wanted to start a high school, and then I missed the meeting, and they made me the principal. So don't ever miss a meeting. Never miss. She's self-employed. She can sit at the school and do her work as well as at home. Yeah.
Where was this?
It was called Baltimore Youth Initiative High School. It was it replaced the high school at the Waldorf School of Baltimore when the board, I was on the board at the time, voted to close it for economic reasons, not because it was doing terribly, but because the whole school was doing poorly, and that was an easy thing to cut off.
I remember when that happened. When you mentioned the crochet, I was thinking about this. First and second grade Waldorf students and the finger knitting and stuff.
Exactly right.
Yeah, so
that's why my kids went there. I was like, somebody said that they were carding wool in the class with the babies. I was like, you got to card wool while your kids were in a baby class? I gotta see that, because I'm a spinner. But yeah, so the last slide actually has rest in peace BYI in the slide presentation, but there was a whole second day that was added because there was so much to do, and I knew we wouldn't get through all of that. But if you actually, Julie Reeder wants to be a part of the presentation. Maybe I'll put people together and see if anybody wants to talk about the rest of it and have more conversation. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Well, I'd love to get together sometime if you have time. So, or with whoever else, so we can just figure that out with the emails or something.
Yeah, that would be great. I dropped my email in the chat, and I just copied the chat. If I don't lose it, I will have that too. So,
do you know Michelle Farmer, who's working
very well? She lives not far from me, and she was actually on the board of a nonprofit I co-founded, and we used to always meet up in the market, but Rona says no.
Oh yeah, I know. Okay, well, we can see if we can meet up at some point, which I would really appreciate that. It'd be great.
That sounds good. I'm easing back into meetups little by little.
Okay,
I don't want to cut anyone off. We're having a great conversation here, but we're over our time by a couple minutes. If everyone wants to head back over to the main stage, I believe we have some more words from Renee, David, and DJ No ID is going to be back on. And then we're going to finish things off.
All right. I apologize. I can't join. I'm dealing with a community loss that I'm navigating. I got to meet up with some people about that. But it was really great to be here. And good to meet you, Jill.
Great to have you on, Geri.
See you later.
See ya.